There you go. People covering for the faces, literally. Okay, welcome everybody. For folks who are wondering where you are, what Zoom you're on tonight, because we're still using Zoom these days. My name is Godfrey Plata. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the Deputy Director of LA Ford, and we're super excited to be hosting tonight's teach-in, where we are all here to learn about our city budget in Los Angeles. And also how to advocate if there are things that you want to advocate for in the little time that is left to be able to advocate and influence this particular budget. The purpose of this call is going to be very much about the basics of a budget. That would mean for any budget of any year, right? Making sure you know how to access it, how to read it, what's in it, how it's created, all of that. And of course, the example that we have is the budget that is the one right in front of us that was dropped on Monday morning. As a special guest, we've got former Councilmember Mike Bonin, who'll be walking us through all of those budget basics. And then we've got representatives of LA Forward's Unarmed Crisis Response Work Group to be able to walk us through how they analyzed the budget specifically for unarmed crisis response services and what they think about it. And hopefully that you all join in on the efforts that they are working on to advance unarmed crisis response here in Los Angeles. In case you're new to LA Forward, just a little bit about us. We aren't just in LA City, we're also organizing all over LA County, but what we do is build community together to build relationships, and through those relationships, really talk about the challenges that we're facing in our city, including how they are experienced in your communities. Tonight, you're going to hear about unarmed crisis response. We would not be working on unarmed crisis response were it not for the stories of community members who are wondering who they could call for help when they weren't wanting armed police to show up to particular challenges that they were seeing in their communities. And over the course of 1.5 years, they brought themselves to this point, influencing a second budget in a row because of the organizing work they're doing. That's the kind of stuff we do here when people can come together. And as you can see on this slide, it's not just unarmed crisis response that our community members have really pushed us to work on. We're also working on climate issues. We're working on governance reform because there's all sorts of rules that govern how we even govern our city, including how we redistrict our districts, how many council seats we have, all those different things. And then clearly housing continues to be a top issue here in Los Angeles, including affordable housing, funding for housing, social housing, making sure that folks who need that affordability are the first into housing as well. So we're working on all of these different issues. If you're not yet involved, you can get to laforward.org and begin to plug in. But here's what we're doing today. Again, we are going to focus in specifically on the LA City budget. There's 88 different cities in LA County, and every city has a budget. And so you can use today's example if you're not in LA City for whatever reason, as a way to begin to explore your own city's budget, but we are going to focus on Los Angeles, the city. Again, we're going to focus in on how it's created, what it does, how to influence it, which is going to be true year after year after year. We might, through that, lift up some early thoughts around this particular budget, but really going to focus on some evergreen skills and knowledge around budgets. We are going to end on a particular note, taking a look at unarmed crisis response and have some ready steps for everybody here to be able to support to ensure that that part of the budget gets some attention this year. That's where we're headed. I'm going to get started just by introducing our special guest, former Councilmember Mike Bonin, who has been an amazing support system for all the things that we do here at LA Forward. In particular, I've learned from him that leadership development and really democratizing this information is of extreme importance and passion to him. It's part of his work, sort of building a movement of leaders beyond the ones that get to sit in City Hall and make the decisions on our behalf. So really appreciative to have him bring all of his expertise and years from LA City Council to you all, including getting to open Blue Books again after some time away from them. I will say that some of you submitted questions in advance. Thank you for that. And Mike has seen those questions. If you have any further questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat, but there will be a Q&A time sometime right after 8 o'clock or so after Mike goes over some basics. So just so there'll be some Q&A time at that time before we move on to unarmed crisis response stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Mike.
Thanks, Godfrey, and thanks everybody for being on the call. This is actually really exciting to see so many people engaged in learning about how to understand, how to impact the city budget. I am chagrined to be here. I spent 18 years, first as a staff member, then as an elected official, going through the city budget every year. And when I left City Hall, I thought I would never have to open a damn blue book again. So thanks, Godfrey, for the case of PTSD. But I'm glad to be sharing whatever experience I have to help folks who are interested kick ass and make change. So let's go straight into the slides, Godfrey, with the first one. So on Monday, as Godfrey mentioned, Mayor Bass proposed her budget for the city of Los Angeles for the fiscal year that starts in July. As you can see, there is a lot of different interpretations about what is in that budget and what the impact is. Some headlines saying homelessness is being cut. Others say homelessness is being emphasized. Some say LAPD is growing. Others say LAPD is shrinking. We'll get into that and we'll explain all that in a bit. But first, let's go to the next slide and hit some of the sort of basics of the budget for those who aren't as familiar. The budget is the spending plan for the city, and the city's fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30th. So we're a couple months before the start of the fiscal year, begins in July, as I said, and it is a combination of local revenue that we raise here, things like sales tax, dedicated fees for specific purposes, revenue from, parking tickets, utility users tax, a hotel tax, they call it the transit occupancy tax, people when they stay in a hotel, all of those revenues, plus state and federal revenue, which are earmarked for certain things, all make up the city budget. And it pays for all the people who work for the city, all the services the city provides, all the equipment that we have, everything from computers to city vehicles to play equipment at local parks, as well as infrastructure, things like our roads and our bridges and all of that. Next slide. So the timeline, as I said, the fiscal year begins on July 1, right? So this budget will get done. Fiscal year will start July 1. And then every quarter, the city looks at how the budget is doing. They call it the financial status report. And they'll be saying, oh, our revenue's up, our revenue's down. Do we have enough? Do we need to trim more? We're going to be okay. But then in October, this coming October, for the fiscal year that begins a year from July, they're going to start the budget process again. And that's going to start with the mayor and the city administrative officer, which is the city's chief budget person, really. And they will give some guidelines to the city departments. There's certain things we're looking for in next year's budget. This year, the thing they said they're looking for in the budgets are cuts. And then in November, the departments will submit their requests to the mayor's office. And then, after the new year, the mayor's office and the CAO and the city departments will all get together to discuss their budget requests and start shaping them a little bit more. And then in March, the city controller submits his revenue forecast. He's going to submit a report that says, this is how our revenues are going this year, and this is how we think they're going to go next year. And that gives them, in crafting the budget, an opportunity to think we can go a little bigger or we got to go a little smaller. Next slide. So then in March and April, the mayor and the CAO, they finalize the budget. And then on or around April 22nd, which is the charter deadline, the mayor submits the budget, as she did earlier this week. Then in April and in May, the council's Budget and Finance Committee meeting holds weeks of hearings on this budget, and they will modify it, make some cuts, make some additions, move stuff around, base different revenue assumptions, whatever, and they will submit a report to the full council, which then votes on it in May. They have until the end of May, and then the mayor, then the first couple weeks of June, has time to either sign it or send parts of it back. The mayor here in Los Angeles has a line item veto. She can line item a specific veto a specific program if she doesn't like it. And then that ends the process, and the fiscal year again begins in July 1. Godfrey, next slide. So there's key issues in every budget every year, right? They differ from year to year. This year, a key issue that everybody's going to be paying attention to is the city's fiscal condition. Revenues have remained relatively flat over the past year. They weren't what people were expecting. And at the same time, the city gave raises to most city employees. They started with the police union, and then just last week, they gave raises to a number of the civilian unions representing city services. That is going to be a cloud, a real dark cloud that hangs over the budget deliberations. The next one, of course, is going to be the police budget. That has been a controversial item in the budget since at least 2020, and certainly gets more debate and more robust discussion now that we have some people who were elected to council with a particular focus on challenging the way the city provides public safety. The budget will also, as it has the past few years, focus a lot on the discussions will focus on homelessness, how to address it, and what solutions the city should be providing versus what the county or the state should be providing. And then the mayor is proposing a whole bunch of vacant positions in the city be eliminated for good. The city has had, you've probably heard over the past year, a hiring crisis. Everybody's been saying we don't have enough staff to do all the basic services. Well, now in this proposed budget, those vacancies are going to become permanent. So the question is going to be, what will the impact be on city services? Next slide. So how do you examine the budget? How do you get into it? How do you actually figure out what's going on here? Because it's actually very, very difficult. I had a staff of, 10 people who looked at different parts of the budget for me. And so did my predecessor, Bill Rosendahl. We all looked at different parts of the budget. And it's not as easy because not everything is in one place. And a lot of the numbers people bring up are not apples to apples. Some people will give you one type of number, another will give you a different type of number, and it's very, very hard to make a comparison. So you really got to do some sleuthing. And the next slide will give you the website you want to go to start your search. That is the budget homepage for the CAO's office, the budget proposals for the past several years. And next slide, Godfrey. This is what it looks like. It's the background shot here that takes up about 2/3 of the screen. That is the city administrative officer's website, and you can see near the top it says 2024-2025 mayor's proposed budget, and it has links to a number of different things. The first thing, the mayor's budget summary, which I did not highlight, you can ignore. It's not important. It's a PR document. It's a feel-good glossy thing. The proposed budget itself is actually very, very key, and you want to spend some time on that. I highlighted that in yellow, and I'll show you some pieces of it in a second. That's the first stop. The second stop is you want to go into, I should have highlighted this in blue, the detail of department program, which is known as the Blue Book, and it's a couple volumes. It is huge. Volume 1, which I glanced at this morning, is like 596 pages. These goes into great, great detail. So when you go to this page, these are the two main things you want to look at. You may want to look if you're particularly interested in where the city is getting its revenue, at the revenue outlook, or any of the other things. But these are the two main places to be looking for information as you look at the budget. Next slide. So this is what the proposed budget looks like. This is the cover of it. And this is a lengthy document. This is over 100 pages long. This includes an overview of the revenue of the city, where the city it's gonna be getting its revenue, the money it gets to spend. It also includes an overview of the expenditures and a sort of a top line for each department. Next slide, Godfrey. So the overall budget is almost 13 billion. It's actually a couple of percentage points less than it was last year. That's the first time I can remember, I think, where the budget actually dipped, and that's because of the revenue issues the city has been having. Next slide. So the budget, the proposed budget in that booklet you just saw there, is presented as a series of exhibits. And Exhibit A is a summary of all the different appropriations. It lists the department, how much they spend on salaries, spend on expenses, equipment, other special stuff, and their total. So I highlighted and blew up the police budget. You'll hear a different number for the police later, but this says 1.8 billion in salaries versus 98 million in expenses. It shows that the main driver there, you can tell just by looking at it, in this department, as in so many others, is salaried employees. That is the vast bulk of how the city spends its money. But this is the first thing you look at just to get a sense. But as I said, they make it difficult. You look at this, and this is only half a piece of information because looking at this, you have no idea, is this an increase? Is this a decrease? What's up? What's down? Next slide. So Exhibit B is where you see what the main city revenues are here. And I highlighted some of the big ones. The biggest revenue source for the city of Los Angeles is the property tax. I can't actually see the percentages because I have something in the way here. There we go. Property tax at over 20% is the biggest revenue source for the city of Los Angeles. The other sort of big one at 11% is the department receipts. Some certain departments are generating money programs they run. Business taxes and sales taxes are also big drivers, and a tax on your utilities. When you pay your utilities, is utility users tax. All of those are the main drivers of the city's budget or city's revenue. But as you can see, and this is good for the city. The city is not over reliant on one source of revenue, right? You can have a bad year with one or two sources of revenue, and as long as you're doing okay in some of the others, you can survive. Where in other places, you have cities that are really almost entirely dependent on sales tax or tourism, like a coastal city like Santa Monica. When the pandemic hit, they were really hurt because people weren't buying cars, they weren't coming to hotels. Our revenue is a little bit more resilient. Next slide. So Exhibit E, this shows you the portion of the city's unrestricted revenues that a department gets. Right, you have all seen, and I'll show it again in a second, the famous Kenneth Mejia billboard, right, that showed how much money was being spent on police. The bar went all the way to the right versus housing and parks and youth development, just a tiny little blip on the graph. That chart that the controller did when he was a candidate and does again now is of the portion of the budget that the city can spend on anything, There's certain money, might be a federal grant for hiring cops that can only be spent at LAPD. There might be revenue from Proposition O, which is a water quality bond that can only be spent on certain types of projects. There's certain federal money that can only be spent on housing, right? Those things are special funds or restricted funds. This is about the general fund of the city of Los Angeles. This money can be spent on anything. And as you can see here, in the last fiscal year, 43% of the general fund was spent on police. This year, it's a little bit more. It's 45.6%, which is being spent on police. Exhibit E is where you can see that. Next. This is Kenneth Mejia's slide, which shows the information in that chart in graph form, and you can see very clearly how big police is compared to some of the other departments. Next. Okay, and then as you go through the proposed budget, you have a section, a couple pages on each city department. It's a top line overview, but as a council staffer, for instance, who's looking at this for your boss, you're going to look at this and you're going to see if there's anything right off the bat that sort of calls to your attention. This I use the Department of Aging because it's a fairly small budget and it was easy for me to look at, but it shows you in the left column how much was spent a couple of years ago, what the adopted budget was for this current fiscal year, and what we think the final spending will be. And then way on the right, the far right, it tells you what the proposed budget is for this year. So something for the Department of Aging struck out at me like a sore thumb. For the past few years, they've been spending 13 million, 11 million, 11 million on contractual services. And in this coming year, they're only proposing to spend $6 million on contractual services. Now, this part of the budget doesn't tell you what those contractual services are. But as a member of the budget committee or someone who cared about seniors, I'd want to know what this is. Does this mean they're cutting back on delivering meals to seniors? Does this mean they're cutting back on certain types of programs that have been providing rent relief for seniors, or legal guidance to seniors? Any of those things, you want to know what this is, because a $5 million cut in a department that is this small is pretty significant. So you want to know what that is. Is it going away, being picked up in some other part of the budget? Next slide. Another example going through this, these pages will list not only where the department's key expenditures are, but also where the department gets its money. So looking through the police budget, I was going through their source of funds, and I noticed that the police department is getting $1 million from the Arts and Cultural Facilities Fund. I have no idea why the hell that would be the case. I have no idea what that would be for, but that's something I immediately would flag this year, and I would want to know, why do we have our scarce art funds being going over to the police department, which has a very big and overly healthy budget? Next. Okay, so the second link I showed you, which is called the Blue Book, is this detail of departmental programs. This volume here, volume 1, is like 600 pages. It's the real meat of the budget. It's got details on programs, type of equipment they're buying, what sort of outside contracting they're doing. It has a very specific number of personnel, how many cops, how many management analysts, how many recreation supervisors, how many tree trimmers. It gets into those numbers. And for some of the departments, it gets into some metrics of how many senior meals do you anticipate serving this year? How many road miles do you anticipate being resurfaced? How many potholes do you anticipate being filled? You'll see that in the Blue Book. Next. And this is just a page from the Blue Book. This is the police page. For some departments, this could be 10, 20 pages long. It includes like graphs like this for the police department. That pie graph shows you sort of how their funding is distributed. They spend 93 million on traffic control, right? That's something that might come up in the unarmed response discussion a little bit later. They spend, about 100 million on personnel training and support. There's rich detail in this, and whatever department you're most interested in, is you really want to go through this with a fine-tooth comb. Next. Okay, so I mentioned before that trying to figure out how much is being spent on anything and how it compares to the previous year is extremely difficult. There are years when, in the middle of the George Floyd summer, when we were evaluating how much to give the police department, how much to take from it, and move to alternative responses, trying to get an answer about what the LAPD budget was from year to year was really difficult. So you saw those different headlines, people saying different things about the LAPD budget. So why is that? Well, it's because there's different ways of looking at it, and people will use different figures, either because it's the ones they believe are most relevant, or they're cherry picking for the narrative they want to tell. Either that the department is underfunded or the department is overfunded. Whatever the narrative is, people can pick their own numbers. So the highest number to look at the police department is the total dollars. All of the costs that you saw in previous slides, plus the pension cost, the healthcare costs. So 2 years ago, LAPD's overall was $3.2 billion. It was about the same last year. And it's going up this year to 3.37, right? So you can look at that and you can say, okay, that's an increase. The direct costs are that's not including the pension. That's not including the healthcare, right? That's what the department itself is managing. That's a smaller figure, obviously. It went from 1.87 billion, then it went down last year to 1.85. There was a fight when some council members voted for the budget that you increased the police budget. Well, they argued, well, direct costs went down. The thing we had control over went down. And then next year, it's looking to go up back to 1.89. So that's where you get, from those two numbers, you get those headlines, the police budget is increasing. But if you look at the final number, the number of sworn officers, 2 years ago, the city budget authorized hiring 9,304 officers, or having 9,304. Last year, a big initiative of the mayor was let's get to 9,500. Almost everybody knew that wasn't possible, but the city budgeted for 9,500. It didn't meet that goal. And so this year's budget, the mayor has proposed a more rational expectation number that the city could perhaps get to 9,084. I think we're at 8,900 and something right now. So people see this and say, okay, the size of the police department is shrinking from last year. And even the mayor's goal of how much to hire is shrinking. So people who look at it this way say, oh no, the department is actually shrinking. So it depends on how you measure, by the dollar or by the number of officers. Next slide. So some of the key players in the budget, because most folks on the outside we don't recognize a lot of these people. Obviously, the mayor, she drafts the budget, but the person immediately to her right here, Matt Hale, was the #1 budget person for Paul Krikorian for years when he chaired the budget committee. He is now the mayor's chief budget person. So he helps her write the budget, and he knows the ins and outs of the city budget better than probably almost anybody in the city. To his right here is Matt Zabo. That's the city administrative officer. He works for the mayor and for the council, and he does financial analysis on everything the city does. He is a huge player in the budget process. He's not elected, but he has the ability through his analysis to greenlight something or kill something. The bottom row, Paul Krikorian chaired the budget committee for a decade. He's now council president, still has a lot of say in how things go. To his right is Sharon So, somebody very few people outside the building know. She works for the council. There's an office of chief legislative analyst, work only for the council. They do research and they do analysis. Sharon knows the budget inside and out. She's been doing it for 30 years. She gives really good advice to the council. She will always find revenue or faulty assumptions about hiring that the mayor's office makes and will have the council course correct. To her right there is Bob Blumenfield, who now chairs the budget committee. He chaired the budget committee in Sacramento for years. He is sort of in control day to day of what happens in these budget hearings. And to his right, Kenneth Mejia, I suspect, is going to be a big player this year. There's going to be some conflict between him and the mayor. His budget is proposed to be cut, both in terms of dollars and in terms of positions. And this comes as they've been at odds over auditing the Inside Safe program for homelessness. And Kenneth has come out very early and very strong, critical of some of the recommendations in the budget. So he will continue to be a voice in this. Next slide. So the next step in the process, right? The budget has come out. People are going to be looking at it for the next couple of weeks. Around May 1st, Sharon So, the legislative analyst I just showed you, she's going to write a report on the mayor's budget and give it to the council and say, these things make sense, these don't make sense. Oh my God, look out for this. And oh, they forgot this. And that will guide the 2 weeks of hearings or several weeks of hearings that this committee does. It's these 5 members of the committee. They're going to be holding some initial meetings on April 30th, May 1st, 2nd, 3rd, the 6th, and the 8th. They will hold more meetings than that, but these are the ones that have been scheduled so far. These will be meetings where they will talk to the mayor's office and they will talk to the general manager and senior staff of every department. And they will ask them very specific questions about their budgets, have them do some homework, and then at a later date, later in the month, they will come back with some answers to those questions. And then the committee will decide what to do with the budget. But I highlighted May 1st here because something seems to be different this year from what I hear. I saw on the agenda that there is only going to be 1 day of public comment in the budget committee. It used to be when I was there and Krikorian was chair, every day there would be some testimony on the budget, maybe an hour or so of public comment. That is now going to be reserved only for May 1st. So it looks like they'll hear the presentation from the mayor on the 30th, hear from the public on the 1st, and then go through the departmental budgets after that. Next slide. So you want something in the budget. You want the budget to be different. You want a program added or you want a program cut. First thing is who really has, go back one. We don't want to talk about what's fucked up yet. We'll get there. Obviously the mayor has the biggest authority over the budget. The mayor proposes the budget. And despite the number of hours that the council will spend on this, particularly the budget committee, despite all the attention that is paid to the council budget deliberations, it is a tiny speck of dollars that gets changed. It's a big show, but very little actually gets changed. Most of what the mayor proposes is what is going to come out. So the mayor is the key player here. But if you want something in the budget, how do you get something in the budget? It takes an advocate somewhere in the bureaucracy, right? So you may have an ally in the mayor's office who wants to see something get in there, and then that's great. But the mayor may bring it up, and the general manager may find a way to sort of bureaucrat it to death by saying, no, this won't work, or we can't do it, or do it, but you got to give me more money for this. So if you have a general manager on your side or a senior staffer in a department who believes in the idea, whether it's an arts program or a pilot program for mental health, that helps considerably because they have months of face-to-face advocacy with the mayor's office. As I said, the CAO is hugely influential. And if they think a program is financially risky, they can effectively kill it. They can talk the mayor out of even putting it in the budget. The next point of influence is the budget committee itself, those 5 members. A mayor, generally speaking, this is my experience over 18 years, wants their proposed budget to go through the budget committee as painlessly as possible. So they will draft a budget that they think this committee will be comfortable with. So you have allies on the budget committee, you have someone they're trying to write a report for. We do not have the most progressive budget committee right now. So one thing progressives are looking for is to get better representation on the budget committee so there's more progressive priorities that can be put through. The other thing is other council members. You may have a council member who's not on a committee, but if they meet with the mayor early in the year and say, hey, I really want, Suzanne Thompson's on the line here, I really want money in the budget for an arts program at Venice Beach. If the general manager of Rec and Parks isn't asking for that, then you really need the council member to be pushing for it early in the budget year. It becomes very, very difficult to shoehorn anything in at the end. But if the council member's advocating, that bakes things in. Also, organized labor, the unions are important, as well as an organized movement behind something, whether it's unarmed crisis response or in the past, there has been a big push over the past several years for a right to counsel for tenants, right? That was a number of groups throughout the city pushing and pressuring year after year. That's also a way of trying to get things in. Winding down, what's fucked up about the budget? So as I've been out of office for a year and a half, I've reflected a bit on what's really sort of wrong with the process. And there's some big things and there's some small things. The first one is there really is not a focus on the really big stuff in the budget, right? We saw that of the general fund, general revenues for the city, 45% of it goes to LAPD. So by that logic, you might think, okay, the council, the budget committee is going to spend half its time talking about the police budget. That does not happen. That does not happen at all. The police budget does not get nearly that much attention. It gets less attention than some others. I went back and I scrolled through last year's budget committee hearings, and of 30 hours of hearings, give or take a few hours, it was about 2 hours discussing things with Chief Moore. It was 2 hours. The focus is just not there on a department that is the bulk of the city budget, that is claiming to do all these things that are often not substantiated by research, that more policing results in the kinds of things that they claim it does, and is a huge liability driver for the city. The focus on the police department should take at least a week just by itself. Other flaws in the process: there's no participatory budgeting, really. The budget advocates from the neighborhood councils get to come to the table and make a presentation, but there is no large-scale citywide participatory budgeting. Another problem is that the council's budget deliberations are divorced from real policy discussions. The people who are experts in a policy, say transportation policy, I chair of a transportation committee, they should be deciding what the policies are, and then they have to fight it out for money. But because everything gets squeezed through the budget committee, they become policymakers on issues in which they are not expert. They become the ultimate authorities on all policy for the city. The other things, real quick, is there's no agreed upon performance metrics. Right? There's no common understanding of really what do we want the police department to be doing this year. Where should their focus be? We do a year-to-year budget instead of a multi-year budget, which makes it very hard to plan. And the city doesn't have a real infrastructure investment plan. So we keep allowing things to be deferred. And then we have huge costs for everything from sidewalks to a new payroll system to a new computer system to park equipment. Next. So to end, just my takeaways on the budget, having looked through it a little bit, I am struck by how many blown opportunities, such a big blown opportunity in last year's budget and in this year. And I'm referring specifically to public safety and policing. Everybody knew that there was no way the city was going to hire 900, 500 officers last year. There was no way. And everybody knew it. Last year, there could have been a discussion about creating significant, substantive, big-scale, unarmed crisis response without having it be a conversation about defunding, because the money would have been there. You could have said, let's use the money that the police department cannot spend. And that was a blown opportunity last year. And this year, I think similarly, even though it's a tighter fiscal year, knowing that the department is not growing, even for those who want it to, this year is an opportunity for people to really say what needs to be said, is that constantly throwing more police at a problem does not enhance public safety. We can enhance public safety by investing in people and in neighborhoods and in services and in housing and in jobs. And it's an opportunity when you have a department that is shrinking to actually redefine for people how we are going to keep you and your neighborhood safe. And I don't see that happening, and it's disappointing because it's a big opportunity. Last two things: huge vacancies not being filled. If you don't think the city has been good enough over the past couple of years with trash pickup or street maintenance or keeping your park clean, it ain't going to get better. We are now locking in that sort of level of services for the next several years because we're not filling the vacancies that people have been screaming about for the past year that prevent us from having services. And the final note: a lot of folks on this call supported Healthy Streets LA, the Safe Streets Initiative. In February, the CAO's office was claiming this was going to cost the city $1.3 billion over 10 years, and the sky was going to fall, and we're going to have to start paying for this on July 1. It was going to wreak havoc on the budget. I don't see 1/10 of $1.3 billion spent on new protected bicycle lanes or on pedestrian safety or bike safety or multimodal mobility in this budget. I think advocates are due an explanation of where the money is that they said needed to be spent, because there was a big prediction of what it was going to cost, and now all of a sudden they're starting, I think, to downsize what they think needs to be done, and that needs some attention. And then the last slide is just how you can get engaged. Budget hearing starting next week, especially May 1, public comment. You can submit written comment, call your council member, or this will go to city council with a public hearing, another public hearing on May 22nd, and then the council will vote on May 23rd. But here's the key thing. Here's the big secret. Almost nothing happens at council. 25 years ago, big budget changes happened at council. That has changed. What comes out of the budget committee is going to be 99.9% what gets approved by the council. Any motion that gets put in by a council member on May 23rd, if it has any influence on the budget, if it changes dollars, if it impacts revenue, anything is going to get sent back to the Budget and Finance Committee. That has been an increasing and now standard practice for the past decade and a half. So your real opportunity to weigh in is right now, because when it gets to council, it's pretty baked. But even more importantly, your real opportunity to engage is right now for next year's budget, for the budget we'll be discussing a year from now, because it takes a year to really build the support and the inside advocacy for new programs. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for that extensive walkthrough, which is also on video, so we can go back and study again and remember that thing that Mike said on that one call that we were all in at. We have about 3 minutes for Q&A time before we pass things off to our unarmed crisis response folks to point to that particular part of the budget. And so I just want to lift up first 2 questions that were submitted in advance. And then I saw, I think, two more sets in the chat box. And this is now folks' opportunity to also add any other questions in the chat box. The 2 questions that were submitted in advance were, one was about what exactly are unappropriated funds, and is there any way to get the city to assign those funds to specific things? And then the second question was, what do you think about zero-based budgeting? What strategies might be useful to move the city away from incremental budgeting in order to fundamentally restructure what we fund?
So the first question was about something called the unappropriated balance, the UB. There's a couple funds that you will hear talked about. There's the reserve fund, the budget stabilization fund, the unappropriated balance. The reserve fund is a set of money that is kept aside in case of an emergency to keep the bond markets happy, right? The city can't borrow money at a good rate if you have reserves set aside. The unappropriated balance is money that is in the budget, but it really only tentatively earmarked for stuff. It may be some loose money that is just left unspent, but often it is where the budget committee will put a program that there is political or institutional support for that isn't fully fleshed out, right? So I think one year they may have put the Department of Climate Emergency Mobilization in the unappropriated balance. It was something the city wanted to do that, but there wasn't enough detail to vote on. Last year, they put some of the police hiring in the unappropriated balance because the council didn't think it was going to happen. So it's money that does get allocated once the details are there for it. If the program doesn't pan out, then it goes back to the general fund and can get spent. But it usually means something needs to be cooked a little bit better. Zero-based budgeting is a concept used, and I think more in business than in a lot of municipalities, but it's a budget that starts from scratch every year, right? And that sounds reasonable. I mean, why wouldn't you start from scratch? Well, government tends to look at last year's budget to determine what this year's budget should be. And there's clearly an over-reliance on that, and the stuff that the city is still doing that probably could have stopped doing 10 years ago. But particularly for progressives in a time of conservative overreach in our society, I think zero-based budgeting can be very perilous because you may have enough votes to get an unarmed crisis response into the budget now, but it's going to be a major political lift. Do you want to have to do that every single year, right? That's hard. You have to do a full campaign, a full justification for everything you want every single year. I think what better than incremental is and Kenneth Mejia has spoken to this, a multi-year budget, so that you know what you're spending this year and 3, 4, 5 years out. You can still adjust those as you go, but it gives you a sense of trajectory for the city of where you're going to invest, much more level of confidence for, say, the service providers doing homelessness work, knowing that they can, plan out hiring people for 5 years as opposed to, not knowing if they're going to get their contract extended after 6 months. So I'd go for multi-year instead of zero-based.
Thanks so much, Mike, and thank you to two folks who submitted questions in advance. For the sake of time, what I'm going to do is ask Mike to take a look at the chat box. And there are 3 sets of questions, one from Suzanne, one from Greg, and then one from Lizette as well. And if you could just go through those and maybe answer in the chat box or reply in the chat box, that would be great. What I'd love to do is position us in these last 10 minutes or so to take a look at the budget, in particular through the lens of unarmed crisis response organizing that's been happening, in particular led through volunteers here at LA Forward. So I'm going to turn things over to 2 volunteers who almost every Monday night at 7 p.m. spend their time with other community members here at LA Forward on Zoom, sometimes in real life, to figure out next steps, meetings that should happen, how to dig into this idea of expanding unarmed crisis response here in LA City. So I'm going to ask Kat and Jason to come onto camera. Wonderful. And I'm going to share my screen and you all just tell me to click, but would love to pass to you all to get us started with unarmed crisis response.
Hey everybody, I'm Kat Tattersfield, she, her, and yeah, I've been part of LA Forward's working group, and we're going to talk about, the work that we've done and how y'all can plug in. So this is, exciting stuff, right? We can, I think, change slides. So this is how it all started, and it's really cool to uplift the fact that focusing on unarmed crisis response did come directly from, LA Forward members and people in the community throughout the city. It was, very clear when LA Forward started meeting with folks that there was a real need for a citywide unarmed crisis response for mental health, for people who are experiencing homelessness and people who are housed as well, right? So during the budget season last year, you may have heard that we got this big W. We got $16 million allocated for unarmed crisis response services that were already happening in the city. And in the beginning, the mayor had 0 increase for these services. So that was, a big deal to get a chunk of money moved to something that had no investment. And since then, we've met with over 40, legislators, staffers, people at the, city and county level, nonprofits doing the work, just anybody that's really relevant in this space to be a decision maker of how it should move forward. And that's what we're trying to do is getting these different levels of government and service providers to really all work together and have a comprehensive approach. Next slide. So we want to be clear what we're talking about when we say unarmed crisis response, because that's kind of a big thing. It could mean different things to different people. Housing is a form of unarmed crisis response, right? So for the purposes of our work here as a budget advocacy group, we're talking about, when you call, like who responds when you're in crisis and the services that result from that call, what, the quality of the service you receive, whether it's a good experience, a positive experience where there's a good long-term outcome, short-term outcome, and making sure that that care is trauma informed and focused on harm reduction, right? Those are keys to our work. Next slide. So there really are 2 programs for unarmed crisis response operating in the city right now. There's the Circle program, and that mostly focuses on calls of people experiencing homelessness. And then there's the newer unarmed model of crisis response. That's a 24/7, and they cover a wider range of calls. And that's actually based on police precinct instead of Circle is kind of like council district based. But I'm going to kick it to Jason, who's going to talk more about that work and how we can expand and plug in.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit more about this, this unarmed model of crisis response is actually the first program created that diverts 6 calls from the police to a different provider. So there are 6 call types of the police's, I don't know how many total they have, like 50 call types that now are being instead responded to in these 3 red areas by teams that are specialized in mental health. And that was a program created with the money we won in the budget last year. And Godfrey, if you can go to the next slide. So just to explain sort of where these things are paid for, Circle has its own $8 million budget. It had that money last year. It has that money this year. The new UMCR program is being paid for out of the unappropriated funds that we won last year. And then they also mentioned that any extra funds needed by the UMCR or Circle would come out of the remainder 13.2 million that we won last year. However, in this new budget, there's no new funding for any evaluation of these programs to see how effective they're being, even though they're pretty new. There's no new funding for expansion of these programs, and there's no new funding to clean up the dispatch of these programs. And that's really important because when we went and we advocated to City Hall last year, we weren't just saying, hey, create a pilot and then let it sort of die on the vine. We were saying, create a pilot, evaluate how well it's doing, and then let's grow it and expand it to the rest of the city. Our goal from the beginning has been to get these services in every part of the city, not just a few city council districts. And another thing I just want to point out, Mr. Bonin was talking earlier about how there's this huge police budget, right? Like in the billions of dollars. We're operating with $13 million. Even though we are diverting 6 call types away from the police, freeing up police officers to work on other crimes and other calls, none of their money is going to this. All of this is having to be paid for out of a new budget item. So, like, none of the money for unarmed crisis response is part of the police budget. So that's a really important factor as well to keep in mind. Go ahead to the next slide. We're going to ask you in a few minutes to take some actions on advocating for more unarmed crisis response in the city budget. And we, over a year and a half, have talked to all these different people. We've identified 2 key priorities for where we want to see the city spend its money this year. One is we've learned that there are a lot of problems with dispatch, with how these, like when you call, you get put onto a non-emergency line. Sometimes you wait 20, 30 minutes to get through. And then when you tell them what's going on, that there's someone on the street who needs help, they don't have a button they can push to send the call over like they do with fire or with EMS. They have to actually, the dispatcher picks up their phone, dials Circle or dials the UMCR, then has to talk to that operator and pass the call over, making the wait time to get actual services to people in need even longer. They also don't have a centralized computer system with these unarmed crisis responders to send the file over, send all the information over. So that when you do get transferred to that new dispatcher, they have to take all your information again. We want to fund a program that will look at what infrastructure is needed, what adaptations are needed to centralize all of that dispatch so that they can just as easily transfer your call to unarmed crisis response as they can to fire or EMS. The other thing is that we want the city to evaluate and start to create metrics for these unarmed crisis response programs. And this is important because when Circle was created, all it was really created for was to have someone other than police be sent out to tell homeless people to move along, to not sleep there, things like that. We want to make sure that all of these services, whether it's Circle, whether it's the mental health crisis response, are being evaluated so that we can know that the people who are being called about are getting proper care that's trauma informed, and that there's actual harm reduction, and hopefully that these people are being connected to further services, like they're getting they're getting put into the homeless management system. They're getting put into getting connected with further mental health help, so that it's not just that one call, there's some follow-up. Go ahead to the next slide. And I kind of just went over this, but yeah, basically this is a little bit more information about the things we want to have happen with the infrastructure for an adaptation for dispatch. We want to make sure that in all of the most successful versions of unarmed crisis response around the country, the commonality is that they have a centralized dispatch system that connects fire, EMS, and unarmed crisis response, and they're treated just like any other crisis response. And we also want to make sure that these programs can talk to the city program or the county programs as well. County also has mental health vans that go out to help people. And we want, when you call 911, you shouldn't have to know whether you need to call the city or the county. They should be able to dispatch your call properly to either service depending on where you are. And next slide. And this is just a little bit more about the evaluation. Some of the things we want to make sure are in these. We also want them to be able to compare and contrast the mental health crisis response and circle crisis response and determine what programs are best for the entire city as they move to expansion in future years. And next, we're just gonna, I don't know, Godfrey, do you want me to pass to you to explain the toolkit?
Sure.
Can I just say one last thing?
Yes,
When you
go.
guys do go to this toolkit, I just want to call out the Unarmed Crisis Response Group worked very hard on this toolkit, put as much information as possible, and I want to call out some people on this call. Hannah Brooms is on this call, and she did a great job on this toolkit, helping us out with everything. And also, there's some really great graphics on this toolkit by C. Sloat. So great job, everybody.
Thanks so much, Jason and Kat. And then also Mike for setting up the volley into this conversation. Jason was just highlighting a toolkit. In this toolkit, you'll see a bunch of different things that you can do to get council's attention before May 1st. Again, May 1st is public comment day. We're going to show up on public comment day. And in advance of that, let's start peppering folks with emails, tweets, phone calls, written comment that gets submitted in council file. Like, they should know that on May 1st to expect hearing more about unarmed crisis response. Like, let's be on their minds already. And if that leads to there we go. Sorry, I just typed it in wrong. Sorry. That was my fault. What Jason just put in, thanks. But maybe with one O and sorry, two O's. There you go. Yeah, that one, the new one right there. So when you go into this toolkit, and I'll actually pull it up in a moment, what you'll see is a couple of things. I'm gonna put it up here. I see that a couple of folks are already joining us. Feel free to join us at this page. But in case you and your friends did not get a chance to see this video, there's some context here for what we're talking about. Everything like Jason and Kat just talked about is summarized here, including what our asks are and what actions we've taken so far to get to this pretty researched place in our priorities. Then the most important part is this piece about what actions you can take now. First of all, we want to make sure that we are getting this megaphone built in a very large way. There's 41 people on this call right now. We're going to want more than 41 getting council's attention. Last year, we had 170 of you actually sending comment, making comment, all of those different things. And so to make that easier, there's a folder here with handy dandy graphics that you all can post and share. We've already collected everyone's hashtag handles for you to ensure that their council offices get attention. There's preset tweets here that you can click on that can lead folks to take action. And then in very formal ways, there's a link here where you can send public written comment. This is the file number you're going to be asked for. Important detail here. Literally, if you submit comment in a written way, you will need to validate it. You'll get an email back that says, like, are you sure you want to do this? And you'll need to go to your email and say, yes, I do want to do this for that written comment to land. We've given you a sample script here so that you can customize it if you want, but you don't have to think as hard because you've got a place to start with lifting up these particular demands. And then if you want to join us in person, again, we have the key dates here, the address of where to go, and then some talking points you can use that you can dial down to just about a minute or so. The easiest step you can take, aside from sharing the graphics, is actually here at number 9, which says send a one-click email. If you go to this website, we've literally made it super easy for you to put in your name, put in your address. There's an email, a simple email here. If you press send your email now, your council member will get this. Right, so it like already does the work of like sending it to your council member. And so perhaps this is something that I'm going to put in the chat box. Here you go. I'm putting it in now. And hopefully you can click on that. I think that will work and not go to an error site. And if you forget our social media toolkit, it's here. It's already here on this website as well. And so you've got everything you need on this page on the LA Forward website. Again, these are all different ways to support, but we need you to do this for yourself and also spread the word using the different graphics that you have in that folder that's linked. You'll just download this, post it, and it's got the email, the web address here as well. The great thing is, as Mike said, there's key players who can influence this. We've been meeting with the key players. We've been making the rounds to council offices. We've been meeting with the deputy mayor's office. They know we exist. They know about these particular demands. You all are uplifting them and ensuring that those meetings don't go forgotten. And so we've been trying to influence for quite some time now. Again, this movement has been around for about a year. And so we hope that while $3 million in a budget deficit year feels like an actual ask, like we're asking them to add money, which feels like a lot when they're slashing money. Again, to Jason's point, this is not even the billions of dollars. This is like, as some folks have used the phrase, this is budget dust that we're looking for right now, and hopefully your advocacy will be able to help increase the budget even slightly, so that we're being smarter with unarmed crisis response, evaluating it, and centralizing dispatch as well. So that's where we are for today. I'm gonna stop sharing screen because I know we are slightly over time, but thanks to those of you who stuck around with us and are here to take some initial next steps. I want to shout out again, former Councilmember Mike Bonin, Jason and Kat on the call, who really shepherded the conversation, and everybody who was sharing questions in the in advance, but also in the chat box as well. So thank you all so much. Again, we'll post this recording, but please do start sharing those links, start sharing those graphics, and help us make our city better this year and in years to come. Thanks so much, y'all.